This topic, truth invites, it never commands, reminds me of several stories that I'd like to share with you. And it also reminds me of a Bible passage that Nirmala shared, and I'm sure I must have heard it as a child growing up because it sounded familiar, but being one of her favorites, it became one of my favorites as well. It's one of the Proverbs, and for those who like to read these things in context, I looked it up, it's Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. And then the next verse is, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will guide thy path. And this is an interesting one, because if we think as people who follow the path of yoga, and I suppose that's most of us here in one form or another, whether it's the physical branch of yoga and the postures, or the meditative side, the devotional side, etc., we lean on our own understanding in one way or another, because that's the whole point, is to have experience. It's to gain understanding. It's to grow in that process. I think, and language is always tricky in these things, because to me the key word in that is lean not, as in lean not so that you fall over when your own understanding gets wobbly or is proven a little bit inadequate. The story that came to mind, this is an extension of a conversation that we were having with Asha last weekend when she was here. She delightfuli characterized the visit as a play date, but to me it was a little deeper than that. There are certain people in life, and she would be one of them, that you can have a conversation with that spans decades. And you may come to that conversation only once in a year. We would only see her or other friends of ours from Ananda sometimes once in a year, once every other year when we lived in India. It would be whenever they happened to come to India. In America, often we would only see them in passing because we would be in situations that were very busy and very active, so we couldn't really spend any time together. But in India, often we could. Often we could have deep conversations. In fact, I remember telling the people who would serve our table in India that they needed to be a little sensitive to the rhythm of the conversation, because one of the things they'd like to do there is fuss over you. This constant, would you like more water? Your glass is almost full to the top, but would you like more? It's like, no, I don't need it. And it sometimes the conversation would be lost or sort of distracted or deflected, and people would have traveled all the way across the world to have that conversation with Swami. In fact, I remember Catherine, when she was working on the book about William and Henry, we, for a period of days and even weeks, we virtually lived in the, I guess it would have been the 12th century. We were sort of occupied with the life of kings and queens in England and France, and what did they do? Why did they do it? Why did they respond in these ways? Anyway, it's fascinating to see a friendship and a level of conversation that can transcend all the now, all the commotion that's going on, all the individual ups and downs of life. And so this conversation that began years ago, Asha's working on a book about Swamiji, and she's up to she, at the time at least, was up to the year 1984. She had done the first kind of 15 years of Ananda, going through all the different activities and projects that he had worked on, and we had gotten to the year 1984. And so we were talking about that year and some of the things that happened that year, and I was reflecting on that he had expressed later in a book, perhaps quite a while later actually, that he had wanted to, he was very concerned about architecture at Ananda. And since in the 70s, we weren't really allowed to build, and whatever we built before 1976 mostly burned down in the fire in 1976, and then there was a moratorium for still another couple of years. It took some time. It really took into the 80s before Ananda Village was getting built with homes. And Swamiji, carrying Master's influence forward, wanted to express uplifting architecture. And he had certain ideas, and he had a lifetime of international experience, which none of us had. Now, I figured into this because at that time, in the mid-'80s, when I was building, I had about 5 years of building experience, which made me a lifetime expert on building. And being, in my youthful, full of beans, enthusiastic mode, I was an expert, and I knew all about these things. And Swamiji, of course, knew all about things spiritual, but I didn't expect him to know things about building. And he suggested at one point that we try building. He was in Europe. He had been back and forth to Europe several times. We had begun the work there. In fact, Nirmala might have even been stationed in Europe by that point. And he had been offered a chance to lecture in Sweden. And he went up to Sweden to deliver this lecture and visit for a few days up there with some devotees. And while he was there, he visited a place where they had Swedish homes that were packaged homes. You could buy the parts, they could be shipped to whatever country it was and put together, and they were delightful. He fell in love with them. So this was the era of Swedish homes at Ananda, which, as you'll see, did not last very long. And so anyway, we were on the other end of this, I and some of the builders, because Swamiji said, let's build one of these. Let's do one of these at Ananda. And so we got a brochure from him that had a little bit of kind of vague information and was, more or less translated into English, but not in a very fulfilling way for me. And so we decided we needed to do a little research. What is this? What does it include? What does it not include? Now, this obviously was before the days of Google and before the days of websites and the opportunity to just sort of do your research from the comfort of your own office. And it so happened that we felt the need to finally just call Sweden on the phone. We wanted to get to the people who put these things together. What we really wanted to know was actually one simple piece of information. What is the siding on this thing made out of? Because, you know how with advertising, if something is organic, like it's food and it's organic, has organic ingredients, they will paste that on the label. It's going to be there. So we figured, look, if it's pure cedar or if it's pure redwood or something, they're going to say. Well, there was no such language, so we kind of wondered, our little suspicions were aroused. So we called Sweden, which of course entailed staying up until midnight to get to a 9 o'clock arrival time in Sweden, according to the time zones. And we called into this office, not knowing what on earth we were going to get in Sweden. And the first guy didn't really speak much English, but he passed us to somebody else who spoke passably good English. And we introduced ourselves. We were interested in this. We were in California. We would, possibly be, at this time the dollar was very strong. There was no euro, of course, but the dollar and the Swedish haven't joined the European Union in the sense of the currency, so they still use the kroner. The dollar was very strong against the kroner, and Swamiji knew this. And so shipping the thing from Sweden to America would basically be free because the dollar was so strong, and which essentially meant that the cost would be fairly competitive with us building from ingredients here in America. So anyway, we finally got to the question we wanted to know. What is the siding? So there was this little scurry in Swedish in the background, and we could tell somebody kind of went to the dictionary, or there were papers ruffling around. Somebody finally came back to the phone and he said, it's made out of particle board. And we said, oh, particle board, okay. Well. And that nixed it. That was enough. In our great wisdom, we just simply made the decision, no, we're not going to ship particle board from Sweden through the Panama Canal to California. Not going to happen. Now, here's the interesting part of this, and this is why it's pertinent to the topic today. Truth invites, it never commands. That was really the wrong decision. We really should have just said yes. I mean, how we finally justified this was we added up the numbers. We finally figured out that between the shipping and because shipping doesn't just mean to the dock in Oakland. I mean, it also means you've got to schlep it up to Nevada City, and you got to get a crane, and there were undoubtedly complexities to this that even we could not imagine, and we could imagine quite a few. And to be fair to us, this was not entirely our decision. Even if we had thought it was the best idea in the world, we were not the ones paying for the house. So, the families who were involved in this may have nixed it in any case. But since we were the ones who basically said we just didn't really think that was such a good idea, I personally felt the weight of karma later on, because in saying no to this idea, we essentially kind of squashed a theme that was important to Swamiji. Architecture was important to him. And the architecture at Ananda Village at the time was very brown, I can say. It was very sort of Japanesey and brown. Did I say brown? It was really, really brown. And Swedish homes were not brown. They were bright, they were colorful, they were friendly, they were interesting, they were clever, creative, fun. They had all these other elements to them. We thought, we can build anything. We can duplicate anything. Yeah, true. But you know what? We never did build anything that looked like a Swedish home, because Swamiji essentially just turned his energy in another direction. If we had said yes, he would have engaged, but we didn't. So it wasn't like he said, you bad devotees. No, he just moved on. And as he wrote in the book, whatever book it was, I don't even remember now, he said, I had it mattered greatly to me to have this, to have good architecture, because it would express an uplifting quality that would be around for decades. There's the saying that we build our homes and then our homes build us. And for the years and decades to come, we think we're influencing by choosing, okay, I like this design, and isn't it nice to have that skylight there, and et cetera, et cetera. But then for the next period of perhaps many years, we live in that home, and the home keeps talking to us all the time. And it says to us whatever went into the construction of it. And Swamiji wanted that message to be a broader message. And it wasn't until years later, when we all had international experience. One of the very next things that happened in my life was he invited me to go and live in Italy. And I went and lived over there for a year. And what did I see? I saw the town of Assisi, which has a very simple building code. Use pink marble. You can build it in lots of different ways and shapes and forms, but use pink marble. That's what the theme of the town of Assisi is, and it's gorgeous. And the buildings are all different. I mean, there's certain themes that are similar, but that theme ties it together. At Ananda Village, we didn't have that unifying theme. We had kind of a classic, I won't say classic suburban hodgepodge, but there was a little bit of that. There was a little bit of every man for himself, we're going to build it the way we see it. And I heard one response, Asha pointed this out because I wasn't part of the conversation, but in response to one of the homes that had a fairly prominent position and was clearly not architect designed, It was rather something I think that came out of a magazine. He said, well, we can always plant trees. And that wasn't quite what he was striving for. And, I look back on that and I think, gosh, we missed a chance. We missed a chance to invite a different energy in and to invite his participation in it. Now, there were, of course, broader themes at play as well during this time. We didn't know. Swamiji didn't walk around with the sign that said, you know what, I know what I'm talking about, shut up and listen. He didn't do that. He was very gentle, he was very subtle. And it was up to us to catch the hint that, oh gosh, maybe we should listen, maybe we should follow along, maybe we should tune in, or not, and miss the chance. So we went ahead and built homes the way we built them, and he more or less turned his attention in other directions. He built Crystal Hermitage through us, and with, in fact, I remember an interesting interchange, again, in my brilliance of 24 years at the time. Swamiji had suggested remodeling the upstairs of the dome at Crystal Hermitage in such a way that it became enclosed as a little bedroom. It later became an office. But there were people living there at the time that needed a room, and that seemed like an obvious place to put it. And so Swamiji said, well, we should just do this. And I normally did not directly interact with him, but I happened to be in the little clump of people who was walking with him right as he said this. And I just blurted out, no preamble, no finesse, no polite polish. I just said, well, don't you want to know how much it's going to cost? It was just unthinkable to me. And he just ignored the question. It was just like, no, I trust you people, you're going to do a good job. Build it, basically, was what he was saying. He didn't say, shut up and build it. He very well could have, but he didn't. But he was telling us, essentially, without sort of thumping his fist down on the desk, I know what I'm talking about. Go ahead and do this. And we found, as we tuned in later over the years, that he did know what he was talking about. But he didn't sort of hit us over the head with it. He let us have the chances to see, and if we took those chances, wonderful. And if we didn't, we didn't. But coming back from being around the world in Europe and other places, we could see, oh gosh, we just didn't have the perspective. We didn't have the vision to see that you can have diversity in unity. And what a wonderful thing that is. This past week, I had another opportunity to experience the Truth Invites, It Never Commands theme. And it's one that I hope never to repeat again, frankly. I had my first and I hope last root canal. And the root canal was a walk in the park. The root canal was pure joy. Having somebody digging around in my tooth, my singular tooth, no problem. What went before it, that was a problem. That painkillers could not kill. And wow, I have never experienced pain coming from one lousy tooth. It's amazing what one tooth can do. And about 3 years ago, we had come back from India, visited the dentist after altogether too long of a time, a period of years perhaps, where I didn't see a dentist in India. And they said, oh, well, you should have these 2 wisdom teeth taken out. And I said, really? Why? Is it like essential? And he said, well, no, it's optional. Well, I said, okay, well, then I'm going to opt not to. So forget it. If it's optional, why should I have them? I've had all my wisdom teeth, 50 odd years. I thought, well, gosh, the little guys are happy in there, let them be. Why do I want to just get up in the morning thinking, let's have some teeth pulled today? Let's just move on with life here. But in fact, they were saying, there's going to be a problem because you're not going to be able to keep this clean in between the two, and no one's going to be able to fix it if you don't. If the problem gets going, it cannot be fixed until those wisdom teeth come out. Well, finally, a dentist here in Sacramento this past March simply said, look, those two teeth have got to come out because there is a problem and it needs to be fixed, and I can't get to it without that. So, okay, May I had the teeth taken out, June and July I had other things fixed, and then came the adventure of last week, and mamma mia, this pain of root swollen up inside. Oh, listen, take care of your teeth. It's really seriously valuable, important. How many times did my mother tell me that as a kid? Yes. Truth invites, it never commands, but every once in a while, truth comes around behind you and hits you over the head or in the rear end and says, if you would have listened, you would have avoided whatever it is. But it's always easy to look back and say, oh, I should have. And it's a little harder going forward and saying, gosh, looking ahead, I should do this in order to achieve that result. And how do we get to that place? We have to learn to listen. We have to learn to see long rhythms, yes, and yet stay in the moment with what God is asking us here and now. Master, when he was with Swamiji, did not ask Swamiji directly and specifically to start communities, because Swamiji said later on, he knew Swamiji would do it anyway. Swami was present when Master stood with hands upraised and said, I am sowing the seeds of community in the ether, and my words will move the West. He knew Swamiji would take those words and make something out of it. But if he had commanded Swamiji, build communities, see, Swamiji would have fixated on that forever after. Instead, Master said, your work is writing, lecturing, teaching, and editing. And so Swamiji focused on those things. And later, when it was time to create community, then he created community. But often we see in our lives that the information or the suggestion is given to us for something that's going to come much later, because we're not ready to deal with that now. Master wasn't going to live forever. Master wasn't going to live to be 100 years old. He had to sort of package up instructions for Swamiji when Swamiji was in his 20s that he might not use until he was in his 40s or 60s. And so he did. And Swamiji had enough attunement, enough awareness to take those and carry them forward. I remember when we were about to move to India in 2003, he was just completing a book called Conversations with Yogananda, an amazing recount of stories and conversations that he had had with Yogananda in the 40s and early 50s. And he had carried notes of those things with him for 60 years and brought them finally forward into book form. And to carry that, and he was saying, well, if I could wait 200 years, I would wait 200 years, because then I would more fully understand what happened in those moments. But he said, I don't have 200 years. I won't be around to write them in 200 years. So I will do the best that I can do now. And that's advice we can all take. I will do the best that I can do now. And if I learn a lesson, this is where we don't lean on our own understanding, because our own understanding will grow. It's just a given. We may think we are the great universal expert of this or that or the other thing, and that somebody else doesn't know because how could they know, or life, is giving us instructions that don't make sense to us. Our understanding will certainly grow. We have to give ourselves the time for that to happen, because it does take time. It doesn't happen immediately. We're going to make mistakes, or we're going to have an incomplete understanding. let it grow, let it develop in its own natural time. The Bhagavad Gita saying, of what avail is suppression? So often we think, oh, I have to, push this down. And no, we have to open up the chance to experience something deeper and greater. Deep meditation gives us a taste of bliss that is so compelling, that's so beyond anything in our normal day. I feel compelled to address the date today, the anniversary of today being 9/11, the 15th anniversary of these events that happened in New York. And, it fascinates me to look, because Swamiji would respond to things. He wrote a beautiful piece. I wish I had it to quote from today. He wrote a beautiful article. He was in Europe at the time, but immediately on the email came a very, very heartfelt response to the events and the attitudes that we could have. Maybe I'll find it and read it tomorrow night. What fascinates me is that Swamiji's discipleship anniversary is the 12th of September. Now, if this happened in the 40s, so long, long before the events 15 years ago, but it's almost as if the timing itself is a message, because the lives of great souls, they are a sort of living scripture for us to tune into. 9/11 is followed by 9/12. Disaster is followed by discipleship. By saying to life, I want to be in tune. We can make outer responses. Okay, so we made various outer responses as a country, as a culture. That's good, that's fine. That's not the level that I want to address it at. There's also an inward response. And our culture is a little bit of a teenager still. Very promising teenager. Very talented. Very compassionate and energetic in many ways. But teenagers don't see the whole picture that life has to show. And it takes time, and it takes awareness, it takes experience, it takes sensitivity. And we have to be willing to grow into that. It also takes the willingness to go inward. And that's what discipleship, whether it's discipleship to these masters behind me or whether it's discipleship to life, that is not so much the issue. It's discipleship. We have to say to life, I want to learn. I want to understand. That's what true wisdom is. True wisdom begins with human understanding, and it broadens to become divine realization. We get to the place where we say, okay, now I understand. Now I understand because my consciousness expands to fill this entire universe. It's not limited to my one body. It's not limited to the tooth that is screaming with pain in my mouth. God, I just couldn't believe it. I even thought, I am not this body. And the tooth was going, yeah. Guess again. You're this body right now. You're just stuck, pal. Broaden the awareness beyond and beyond and beyond. There is no limit to that bliss that can come and that wisdom that will come with that realization. Namaste.